Lithotomy. If you were unlucky enough to have kidney stones in 17th century Europe, you would need a traveling lithotomist. Think of him as the rock star of bladder stone removal. Your only hope was to seek out a traveling lithotomist, a surgeon specializing in removing bladder stones, where he used things like a lithotomy knife and a thin rod to go up your peeing hole known as a lithotomy staff. You'd lie down, potentially strapped to a table, as the lithotomist sized up his workspace. No anesthetics, no pain relief, just you, him, and his narrow set of instruments that were about to go up your urethra, the tube that you use to pee through. They'd make a nice little incision and go looking around in your private parts like a kid searching for loose change in the couch cushions. Except instead of finding quarters, they'd be yanking out kidney stones the size of golf balls. So you can imagine the doctor midway when he gets a large one. How'd that thing fit in there? All while you're biting down on a leather strap trying not to scream. And if that weren't enough fun, they'd sometimes have to go a step further and enter through the back door. Those were the good old days when put 'em under meant knocking you over the head with a mallet or having you drink unsafe amounts of vodka until you can't feel a thing. Once he managed to locate and dislodge the stones, these tongs and forceps would come to extract them one fragment at a time through that narrow urethral tube. It's reported that in most cases this procedure would make a grown man wish for the sweet release of death. The surgery could last hours upon hours. All you could do was remain precariously still while enduring what equated to the pains of childbirth through your urethra. Cataract surgery. Now, cataracts are those annoying cloudy spots in the lenses of your eye that can interfere with your vision. They form when the proteins in your lenses start clumping together. This makes it harder for light to pass through properly, so you end up with blurry vision, faded colors, and trouble seeing at night. Over time, if they get worse, they can really mess with your ability to see clearly. Cataracts often occur with age and can easily be fixed with modern surgery in about an hour. But unfortunately for many people who got cataracts before they got old in pre-anesthesia time, the surgery wasn't pleasant, to say the least. You'd find yourself seated, chin propped up, as a surgeon loomed before you holding a slender, razor-sharp needle or knife. Now, the instructions were simple. Do not move, or you'd go blind. Easy, right? With your eye held open by metal speculums, the surgeon would begin the process of making a cut into the extremely sensitive eye tissue. Each millimeter of blade cutting would trigger lightning bolts of searing pain directly into their brain. Their bodies were forcibly restrained as they thrashed in torment while the surgeon's assistants struggled to keep their heads still during the convulsions. Once the cut was made, the next stage was often to insert the sharp needle deep into the eye's lens to dislocate the cataract. Now, if you were a surgeon of that era, you had to possess remarkably steady hands and nerves of steel to operate unconscious patients. The lack of anesthesia, as you can imagine, made cataract surgeries before the 19th century tremendously agonizing because someone is literally picking around your eye with needles. But at least you now had an eye-opening experience. Amputation. Let's say you're a young soldier in the Napoleonic Wars. You take a nasty cannonball to the leg out on the battlefield, and unfortunately for you, it's shattered beyond repair. Your only hope is getting that limb chopped off before infection sets in. So, there you are, lying on an operating table, probably in some dimly lit tent, smelling of blood and pain. The surgeon comes over, bone saw in hand, and tells you to bite down on a leather strap or stick and be a man. Easy for him to say. He would then use a razor-sharp knife or saw to cut through the skin, muscle, and bone of the leg. Blood loss was also a major issue, so tourniquets were applied extremely tightly to attempt to stem the bleeding during the amputation. The whole procedure, from the first incision to complete removal of the leg, often took 20 to 30 excruciating minutes from start to finish. After the limb was finally severed, the remaining stump was heated and cauterized using a red-hot iron implement to burn the wound closed. Survival rates were low, as many patients died from the same injuries that necessitated amputation or from subsequent infection or blood loss. Survival was a coin toss. Infection or blood loss could get you either way. Cesarean section. Let us take a quick biology lesson to talk about the birds and the bees. Now, normally, women give birth through the vagina. However, in some cases, a C-section is needed. Sometimes nature's exit door just isn't big enough, and a little surgical intervention is required. This surgery is usually necessary if the baby is too large, in an unusual position, or if there are complications like health risks to the mother. Those times when the baby decides to play hide and seek with the birth canal or show off some acrobatic moves. Now, some women before anesthesia weren't as lucky, and the decision on whether to save the baby or the woman went to the father. If the father chose to save the baby, well, a live C-section would be performed. The woman is secured to the table, her wrists and ankles bound tightly to limit movements. Just a casual day at the medieval spa. The surgeon takes up a razor-sharp scalpel and leans over the patient's exposed belly, enlarged with her unborn child. Then he begins carving into the flesh. Hot iron tools would be on hand to sear bleeding vessels as the cut was fully extended. Retractors and hooks would be used to peel back and hold open the tissues to expose the uterus. Imagine your body being opened like a biology textbook, except you're wide awake and flipping the pages isn't optional. Once visible, the surgeon would make a second deep incision directly into the uterus and tissue using the scalpel. The sac would be ruptured and the infant would be carefully extracted, all while the woman was awake and in the most horrific pain you can imagine. Now, because of the blood loss, almost always the mother would die. But at least the father had a new healthy baby to look forward to. Hemorrhoidectomy. Another horrible condition to have before the invention of modern medicine. You see, hemorrhoids are swollen veins in your rectum or anus that can itch, hurt, and sometimes bleed. They often happen from straining during bowel movements or just sitting too long. So let us set the scene. You're a patient afflicted with severely prolapsed bleeding hemorrhoids, huge veins in the lower rectum making every movement a new adventure in pain. With a razor-sharp blade, the surgeon begins making the first cuts around the hemorrhoidal masses. It doesn't take a genius to realize that someone with sharp instruments moving about in your ass is more than extremely painful, but the patient unfortunately has multiple hemorrhoids just sitting there. As the surgeon dissects and isolates each individual hemorrhoid, blood often poured literally everywhere. Involuntary muscle contractions from the pain made it difficult for the surgeon to operate accurately, often leading to repeated cutting motions that made the suffering worse. Removing internal hemorrhoids required operating deeper into the butt, causing sensations like being repeatedly impaled. After what feels like an eternity of being repeatedly impaled, the final stage involves suturing the wounds closed while you're still conscious. Ouch. Trepanation. Let's talk about a mind-blowing experience. Literally. Assume you're living in ancient Peru circa 6500 BC. You've been experiencing splitting headaches and convulsions that won't stop. The medicine man takes one look at you and says, "I've got just the cure. We're going to drill a hole into that head of yours and get rid of the bad spirits." In certain civilizations, trepanation was thought to allow ghosts or supernatural powers to enter or exit the body. To begin, the patient's head would be tightly bound or held in place, as any movement can make the whole procedure go horribly wrong. In some cases, they may have been given wine or herbal concoctions in an attempt to dull the pain. The surgeon would then take a sharpened stone, metal tool, or even a flint knife and begin scraping or chipping away at the skull. Piece by agonizing piece, layers of bone would be removed in a slow, meticulous process. In certain cases, the entire operation consisted of drilling a single hole using a drill-like instrument attached to a reed or wooden shaft as the drill bit bored into the skull. For the unlucky ones, the surgery went further. Large sections of the skull had to be removed entirely. This may have involved using a cranial saw to cut a rectangular or rounded bone flap. Those who survived the initial trauma then faced a battle with infection as open wounds oozed and throbbed. However, trepaners did employ rudimentary antibacterial remedies like pepper, wine, and fungal extracts to encourage healing. Lobotomy. So basically, the idea behind these lobotomy procedures was that severing connections in the prefrontal cortex of the brain would somehow help treat mental illnesses like schizophrenia. Well, from our more humane medical point of view, looking back, it's just an insane way to treat a mental illness. Kind of like having to hammer in a doornail so you carpet bomb the entire house just to make sure you got it just in case. Let's say you're the patient and were restrained and completely awake as the surgeon took these metal picks or levers and literally hammered them through the eye sockets towards the brain. Obviously, the moment those picks made contact with the brain tissue, the patient would just let out these screams of immense pain. The picks were just slicing and tearing through the most sensitive areas of the brain, all in an effort to cure the patient. And the surgeons didn't stop there. They kept jamming the picks deeper into the prefrontal cortex, severing connections all while the patient was essentially being butchered from the inside out. Hemorrhaging, seizures, convulsions, all expected, all accounted for in these operations. The craziest part is they kept going until they achieved the desired calming effect, which really just meant inflicting enough brain trauma to potentially turn the person into a lifeless husk, which was barely effective, as now you had someone who was suffering from schizophrenia the whole time, but couldn't even complain about it. Mastectomy. If you were a woman who discovered a lump in her breast in the 1800s, it was often thought to be a sign of potentially deadly breast cancer. Back then, there was no way to screen for it, no chemotherapy, no radiation treatments. A full mastectomy removal of breast was the only option to try and stop the spread. In some cases, a leather strap or stick was placed between your teeth to help muffle the screams of agony of pain that were to come. With a scalpel or curved surgical knife, the surgeon would make the first incision, slicing through the skin of your breast. As cancer and the tissue were slowly, and painfully separated from the body, the time came to cut through the chest wall muscles to remove the cancer fully. This process, involving cutting muscle fibers, was perhaps the most excruciatingly painful part. This part of the surgery could last an hour or more before the diseased breast tissue was finally removed, leaving the patient in such horrible pain that she stood a 50-50 chance of dying by the next morning if she was lucky. So now, not only did you lose your boobs, but you now had the chance of dying from an entire list of infections with names from A to Z, because hygiene wasn't that big of an idea back then. Dental extractions. Unfortunately, you took one too many drinks at the party, hit your mouth at the local pub in 1710 England, and were taken to the barber. In front of you is a huge and beefy-looking guy who is the barber surgeon of the town. A barber who, yes, literally does cut hair in his free time. It's just that at the time they also doubled down as surgeons because they knew anatomy. In his hands, a set of crude scalers, hooks, scalpel, and forceps. The procedure involved the dentist or practitioner using plier-like tools to firmly grasp and violently pull the tooth from its socket in the jawbone. As the steel instruments clamped down on the tooth, a lot of pain obviously radiated through the sensitive nerves and tissues in the area. When the pulling motion began, it incited insane pressure and tearing sensation in the gums, tooth sockets, and surrounding bone structure. Involuntary movement from the extreme pain made it difficult for the dentist to maintain a secure grip, often leading to repeated violent reaching motions that made the suffering worse. Bleeding from the trauma to the soft oral tissue was hard to control and risked choking if excess blood drained down the throat. To make it worse, because of all the force used, the patients risked having their jaws literally fractured. Now, unless you want me to trepanate your skull for watching all our videos without subbing, I'd recommend you join our Discord server for the latest updates on what to do at home when your parents aren't looking. Excision of tumors. So you're living back in the early 1800s and you've got this tumor growing on your neck or stomach region. We're talking about a big mass protruding out. At the time, there were no effective treatments for cancer beyond primitive surgery. Your only hope is to go under the knife and have this cancer hacked out entirely. Now, the issue was that they were literally going to slice you open and dig out this tumor mass while you're fully conscious and feeling every slice. You're made to drink a large amount of alcohol to cope with the pain. Then the surgeon starts making the first cuts with a sharp scalpel or those curved surgery knives. This time, slicing straight into your skin and flesh around the tumor's edges. The intense searing agony hits you instantly as all those nerve endings get severed. As the cutting continues, the surgeon digs around the tumor mass, and they're cauterizing the bleeders too by searing your flesh with these red-hot tools, filling the air with the stench of burning flesh. With each tug and tear as they try to dislodge the tumor, you're thrashing violently against the restraints. Maybe they have to call in even more stronger guys to hold you down at this point. Finally, after what could be hours of this sadistic slicing and excavating, the entire tumor emerges. But often, they must make one final lacerating cut to extract it fully, so they must repeat the whole process again. But at least you're cancer-free now. Fistula surgery. A fistula is an abnormal connection between two parts of the body, like an organ or blood vessel. Imagine your body deciding it needs a few extra doors where there really shouldn't be any. For example, it can form between the intestine and the skin, causing leakage. If you were a patient in the early 19th century afflicted with a fistula, an abnormal, painful, pus-filled channel burrowing between the rectum and external skin, your only option was to see a surgeon to fix you up. A visit to the surgeon back then was less medical marvel and more horror movie. With a razor-sharp scalpel, the surgeon begins laying open the affected area by making the first incisions around the fistula's path. And here's where it gets fun, for the surgeon at least. The surgeon starts slicing into the area in a spiral pattern, peeling all the flesh away from the fistula tube. It's like trying to peel an orange with a scalpel, but way more squishy and less vitamin C. Every cut, every tug, bam. Apparently, it's described as a level of torture where your mind just dissociates from the agony. Imagine your body being so done with this nonsense that your brain just says no out of the situation. Finally, mercifully, they finish by cauterizing the whole area shut with those red-hot irons. Thanks to anesthesia, we can now do those repairs without putting people through such horrors. Orthopedic surgery. It was a bizarre accident. One wrong step and a painful crack as your leg shatters like a twig. As you lay on the cobblestone pavement, waves of nausea rush over you from the searing pain that had swept through your damaged leg. The surgeon's chambers provide little assistance as two assistants half-carried, half-dragged you inside and fastened you to the rickety operating table. Sweat went over your eyes as you examined the collection of bone saws, metal clamps, and other instruments you had heard were used. Now, it was your turn. The surgeon himself entered, his expression confused as to how someone could break their leg on a staircase as he examined the bend in the patient's leg. He nodded and motioned for a leather strap, which was then pushed between your clenched jaws. The initial cut with the scalpel into your leg sent lightning bolts of agonizing pain through your body. At one point, the surgeon's helper had to throw his full body weight across your screaming body to keep you still. The stench of charred flesh engulfed you as the hot iron dropped, cauterizing the deep wound shut. Finally, the painful surgery came to an end. You slipped in and out of consciousness, waking to find your wounded limbs splinted and clothed. With your new leg, hop on back home to tell the missus of your horrible night out. Penicillin. You might not think much of it now, but you have to understand how massive this was in 1928, because at the time, you could have gotten cut by a rusty fence, and that was it. You're dead. Accidentally get pneumonia? Dead. Interestingly enough, the discovery in 1928 was almost accidental. Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming accidentally left a petri dish of mold growing on bread with another petri dish containing other bacteria. When he came back, he noticed that the mold from the bread prevented the growth of these bacteria. Penicillin's availability transformed once fatal diseases like pneumonia and strep throat into manageable ailments. Its widespread use marked a pivotal moment in healthcare, significantly shaping modern medicine and prolonging human life expectancy. So yes, the biggest invention in the 20th century came from moldy bread. Microwave. Before it, heating food meant waiting patiently by the stove or oven, hoping your meal wouldn't burn or dry out. In 1945, a scientist named Percy Spencer stumbled upon the power of microwaves while working with radar technology. He noticed a candy bar melting in his pocket near a huge military device's live magnetron. He experimented further, using microwaves to cook popcorn and eggs, eventually creating the first microwave oven. They now provide quick, convenient cooking compared to traditional stoves and grills. Their rapid heating method preserves nutrients and flavors. Microwaves enable efficient meal preparation. Splitting the atom. An atom is the smallest unit of an element, consisting of a center, the nucleus, surrounded by a cloud of electrons, negatively charged particles. For reference, a grain of sand is nearly 1,000,000 times bigger than a single atom. Meaning, before 1932, it was science fiction to try and use atomic energy to generate any form of power, even though, theoretically, it could prove vast amounts compared to the burning of wood. Then, in 1932, scientists James Chadwick and Ernest Walton achieved the seemingly impossible. They split the atom. Using a particle accelerator, they bombarded lithium atoms with protons, causing them to break into smaller helium nuclei. The nuclear fission breakthrough revealed the immense energy in the atom's core. A single uranium atom being split will release more than 20 million times more energy than a single atom of wood being burnt. With nuclear energy, we can create clean and sustainable energy that can power millions of homes with just a few blocks of uranium as compared to the millions of tons of coal or wood. Electricity. Electricity wasn't necessarily invented, as it existed naturally through things like lightning, but it was harnessed over time and used. Perhaps the most famous experiment would be in the 1750s when Benjamin Franklin flew a kite with a metal key attached during a lightning strike, proving the electrical nature of lightning and sparking further research. We could generate electricity by things like static. Now, the issue was how to use this energy. Over the next few centuries, scientists like Volta invented the first practical battery, providing a steady source of electricity, while Faraday discovered the principles of electromagnetic induction, which laid the foundation for generating electricity on a larger scale. The invention of the light bulb in the late 19th century proved we could convert electrical energy into light. Instant noodles. They emerged from the inventive mind of Momofuku Ando in post-World War II Japan. Momofuku Ando noticed large lines outside ramen shops and envisioned a convenient way to enjoy ramen at home. His invention of instant noodles quickly gained popularity, spreading across Asia and eventually becoming a worldwide phenomenon. Instant noodles were born, offering a portable, shelf-stable meal with hot water that could be ready in minutes. Ando's creation revolutionized mealtime, providing a convenient solution for busy individuals and changing how the world eats. From college dorms to office pantries, instant noodles have become a global staple, offering a taste of comfort in a hurry. Refrigerator. Before the invention of the refrigerator, preserving food meant relying on techniques like salting, drying, or submerging in ice. The most common way to preserve meat is by making it jerky, but this was in no way as good as modern-day jerky. Hundreds of years ago, food was cooled with ice or in cool cellars, but that would only last less than 12 hours. But the mechanical refrigerator uses a special liquid that goes through a process where it gets squished, cooled down, turned into a gas, and then sucked back in to cool things off again. A never-ending loop keeps your food nice and cold, even when it's hot outside. The light bulb. The development of the practical light bulb wasn't a solo act by one inventor, but rather a collaborative effort involving numerous individuals. The invention of the practical light bulb involved a series of experiments. In 1879, Edison created a bulb that could last for extended periods using a carbonized bamboo filament. Enclosed in a vacuum-sealed glass bulb, this filament could glow for many hours without burning out. Edison's key breakthrough was developing a commercially viable light bulb with a long-lasting filament, paving the way for widespread adoption of electric lighting. Thomas Edison is widely credited with the invention due to his team's successful creation of a commercially available bulb in 1879. However, his team included minds like Nikola Tesla, who significantly developed the direct current DC electrical system that powered these early light bulbs. Plastic. Plastic is an insanely long-lasting material that has almost infinite uses. In 1907, Leo Baekeland introduced Bakelite, the first fully synthetic plastic. Since then, plastics have multiplied, finding applications in virtually every industry, from packaging and construction to healthcare and transportation. Plastics have revolutionized packaging, extending the shelf life of food and reducing waste through lightweight, durable containers. In construction, plastics contribute to energy efficiency and design flexibility, while in healthcare, they enable sterile medical devices and life-saving equipment. Plastic is the perfect double-edged sword because plastic's half-life is extremely long compared to anything we create. The problem with plastic disposal is that burning plastics releases extremely toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. Mapping the genome. DNA is a library containing vast information, but the books are chaotic and out of order. This is similar to how scientists viewed the human genome before the genome mapping. It is an entire set of DNA instructions in a cell. Like all living organisms, the human genome carries the genetic instructions determining our physical traits and functions. These instructions are encoded in DNA, a complex molecule resembling a twisted ladder. The Human Genome Project, HGP, launched in 1990, aimed to sequence and map all the genes of the human genome, providing a comprehensive blueprint of human DNA. The completion of the HGP in 2003 marked a historic milestone, revealing the sequence of over 3 billion base pairs that make up human DNA. It was an effort that provided insights into the genetic basis of human traits and diseases and laid the groundwork for advancements in medicine, agriculture, and biotechnology. Genome mapping has accelerated crop improvement efforts in agriculture by intensifying genes responsible for desirable traits such as yield, pest resistance, and nutritional content. Blockchain technology. At its core, blockchain is a decentralized, distributed system that records transactions across a network of computers securely and transparently. As individuals or groups first proposed the concept of blockchain using the fake name Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008 as the underlying technology behind the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Blockchain technology enables chronologically recorded transactions where each data block is linked to the previous one, forming a chain. This decentralized nature eliminates the need for intermediaries like banks or financial institutions, reducing transaction costs and increasing transparencies. One of the key features of blockchain is its security. Due to its decentralized nature and different techniques, blockchain provides high security against tampering and fraud. Once a transaction is recorded on the blockchain, it becomes unchanging and transparent, making it highly resistant to manipulation. Solar panels. The basic principles behind solar energy conservation were first discovered in 1839 by French physicist Alexandre Edmond Becquerel, who observed the photovoltaic effect, where certain materials generate electric current when exposed to light. These special panels are covered in tiny squares called solar cells. When sunlight hits these cells, the light gets converted into electricity, similar to how a battery works. This electricity can then be used to power your home. It's similar to having a mini power plant on your roof using the sun's free and endless energy. In 1954, researchers at Bell Laboratories in the United States developed the first practical solar cell. Today, solar panels are manufactured using various photovoltaic materials, including crystalline silicon, thin film semiconductors, and emerging technologies like perovskite solar cells. As a result, solar energy has emerged as a leading alternative to fossil fuels, offering a clean, sustainable, and abundant source of electricity for the future. Vaccines. In the 18th century, Edward Jenner observed that milkmaids who had contracted cowpox seemed immune to the more deadly smallpox virus. Cowpox was a common disease then similar to smallpox, but less deadly. Building on this observation, Jenner experimented in 1796, where he gave a sample to a young boy, James Phipps, with material from a cowpox sore. Later, he exposed Phipps to smallpox, confirming his immunity. This discovery laid the foundation for vaccination, a term derived from the Latin vacca for cow. Jenner's smallpox vaccine became the first successful vaccine, paving the way for the eventual eradication of smallpox and inspiring the development of vaccines for other diseases. Vaccines are humanity's superheroes, defending us against some of the deadliest diseases known to man. They work by stimulating the immune system to recognize and fight off specific pathogens, such as viruses or bacteria, without causing the disease, literally saving billions of lives. Stethoscope. In the early 1800s, a French doctor named René Laennec faced an interesting dilemma. He was treating a young woman who was too overweight for him to comfortably use the traditional method of placing his ear directly on her chest to listen to her heart and lungs. So Laennec came up with a quick solution. He rolled up a piece of paper into a tight tube and used it to listen to the woman's chest. Surprisingly, he found it amplified the sounds of her heart and lungs much better than the traditional method. Laennec then improved his paper tube by crafting a more sophisticated version from wood. The first stethoscope was born. Gunpowder. Around the 9th century AD in China, alchemists seeking an elixir of immortality stumbled upon something far more explosive: gunpowder. The alchemists accidentally discovered it around the 9th century as they combined saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur hoping to get gold. They discovered an explosive mixture. This accidental mixture revolutionized warfare, shaping history with its devastating power and becoming a cornerstone of military technology worldwide. Over time, the potential of gunpowder for propulsion was recognized. Early firearms emerged, transforming warfare. Armies equipped with muskets and cannons gained significant advantages, changing battle tactics and influencing the course of history. While mainly associated with warfare, gunpowder also found uses in peaceful applications. It facilitated mining and construction by enabling more efficient methods for rock blasting. Quarries and tunnels could be dug deeper and faster, paving the way for infrastructure development. Opium syrups. While nowadays it's entirely normal for babies to get fussy when they get uncomfortable, hungry, or sleepy, parents back in the ancient times didn't think so. Instead of trying to figure out why their little kids were restless and crying all the time, or maybe sing them a lullaby, they would come in with a little bottle of syrup and pour a couple of ounces of opium-laced syrup down the baby's throat. Because nothing says sleep tight like a narcotic nightcap. Yeah, opium is a highly addictive substance that can cause extreme side effects and dependence even with grown adults. Now, that's essentially what parents in the early 20th century were told to do whenever their fussy baby had a bad case of the crankies. After all, who needs a lullaby when you've got liquid opium? Drugstores were filled with varieties of the soothing syrup as a cure for teething pain, fever, and other infant ailments, so parents turned to them as the solution to putting their babies to sleep. You pour your baby some opium syrup, which was taken quite too literally because the babies became addicted to the opium syrups. Most suffered from an overdose and eventually died. It wasn't until the early 20th century that people began to realize the dangers of giving their babies opium syrup. Then laws and regulations were put in place, and gradually these soothing liquids slowly disappeared from the shelves, much to the relief of babies and their livers. Spider webs as bandages. It was just another random Tuesday afternoon with you playing outside with your friends. Suddenly you trip over a rock and hurt your knees really bad. The injury starts bleeding profusely and mom rushes out, but instead of a first aid kit, she's grabbing the spider webs that have been at your front entrance for weeks now. Apparently those webs were the very first natural first aid wound dressing and were used by our forefathers to treat injuries. The belief here was that since spider webs could trap flies, dust, and small insects, they could also trap the blood or pus from an open wound. With this conclusion, ancient Greek doctors would gently weave a freshly spun spider web over wounds or sore spots, press it down tightly, and wait for the web to absorb everything. It turns out that what's good for catching flies is also good for catching, well, blood and pus. While it seemed weird to apply spider webs to open cuts or wounds, they had natural antiseptic and antifungal properties to keep the wounds clean and prevent infections. Hence, this practice was not so crazy and actually stuck around for decades. Well, now you know that spiders are not just for Halloween decorations anymore. Animal dung ointments. It might seem wild to you now, but animal dung was the OG natural skincare treatment for centuries. Skin rashes? Apply cow poop. Have a breakout? A generous coating of sheep's dung was your answer. They believed that since animal dung made their plants grow lushly and vibrantly, the vitamin-packed dung minerals could do wonders for the skin. And just like you have different skincare products for other body parts, different types of dung were equally used for different skin ailments. So if you were experiencing hair loss or baldness, pigeon droppings were your favorite hair cream, and dog poop was strictly prescribed for sore throat. So technically, people were just eating the animal shit under the belief that crap was pure nourishment. Radioactive remedies. It's the 20th century when cancers and tumors were still quite mysterious and very difficult to treat, so doctors began exploring various unconventional approaches. Then a certain doctor, Arthur Roberts, decided to use radioactive substances to shrink the tumors, which we now know can cause radiation sickness and genetic mutations conditions, but at the time, the potential benefits seemed to outweigh the risks. Soon enough, radioactive substances became the bread and butter for treating every illness. People put it in everything from their toothpaste to tea, chocolates, and even ice cream. And as if soaking up their insides with chemicals equivalent to a nuclear bomb wasn't enough, someone came up with a radium-laden elixir called the Radithor. This new potion was guaranteed to cure everything under the sun, and people just went crazy about it. A famous victim of Radithor was Eber Byers, a wealthy American socialite and athlete who drank so much of it that his jaw literally fell off his mouth. He died of several cancers in 1932 and was buried in a lead-lined coffin, but when he was exhumed in 1965, his remains were still radioactive. People soon realized that using their bodies as a dumping site for radioactive substances is as ill-advised as detonating a bomb in a residential area, so they stopped this remedy. Fecal transplant. The idea here is that taking poop from a healthy person and putting it into the intestine of a sick person would make them feel better. The scientific fact behind it is that the poop from a healthy person has a ton of good bacteria that the ill person lacks, so transferring all those beneficial germs from one intestine to another can help restore the proper balance in the recipient's digestive system. Think of a fecal transplant as the ultimate gastrointestinal matchmaking service. It's like setting up a blind date between your gut bacteria and someone else's, hoping they hit it off. Doctors were literally transferring poop from a healthy person's body to the intestines of the sick patient using a practice known as yellow soup. It basically involved the sick person drinking the watery poop of the healthy donor as treatment for food poisoning and diarrhea. As disgusting as this may seem, it is still a standard medical practice in today's world to treat a variety of infections. Thankfully, the drinking of yellow soup has been modified, and now doctors use more hygienic methods, like enemas. Cauterization with hot irons. You might have seen this play out in a lot of movies, where the main character sustains a deep cut, but there's no hospital or medical kit around to stop his bleeding, so he quickly makes a fire, takes out a small knife and places it over the fire until it's glowing red from the intense heat, which he then places on his wounds to seal it shut and stop the bleeding as he yells in agony. That familiar movie scene is cauterization, and back in the day, it was the standard way to treat specific injuries and skin conditions. The purpose of cauterization is to cook wounds shut and seal off any bleeding, or to burn off warts or other growths on the skin by charring them away. While undoubtedly extremely painful and primitive by today's standards, cauterization was one of the only effective methods surgeons had before modern tools and antiseptics to stop bleeding and remove diseased tissue. The intense dry heat did successfully keep wounds shut. Tobacco enema. It's 1986 and you're just having a really bad day. Your cat died and you just got fired from your job, so you head to the local bar to get some alcohol or an energy drink to lighten up your mood, but instead you're asked to lie on your tummy while someone starts to blow tobacco smoke up your butt through your bumhole. The point of this mind-boggling treatment was that the tobacco smoke would stimulate the intestinal lining to restore your mood and make you feel alive. That was not the end of it though. Apparently, blowing tobacco up a person's ass could also be used to treat colds, cholera, and even revive those who are unconscious. Although it may not have been the tobacco smoke improving their mood, but the fact that someone was actively opening up their bums to insert a tube and blow smoke in. Corpse medicine. For some time now, Sarah has been experiencing the worst type of migraines, and after a really bad episode, she finally takes a visit to her doctor's office. After diagnosis, the doctor heads straight to the local morgue and cuts off the left finger and big toe of a freshly deceased corpse to mix and prepare Sarah's medicine. Yup, mixing the flesh and blood of dead people for medicine was a very standard practice for the people living in ancient Europe. The central idea behind this practice was the belief that freshly decomposed corpses still had power and vitality in them, so naturally they thought, why waste good material? Ancient doctors would basically crush up different body parts from dead people, add blood to the mixture, and your healing potion was ready to go. Now, it was very typical during this time to see people fighting to collect the blood of freshly exhumed criminals because they believed that drinking the blood of a strong man could make them strong. It's basically an ancient version of a protein shake. Toad vomit therapy. Well, we have the water therapy, food therapy, and then there's the toad vomit therapy. And its name is precisely what it sounds like. For starters, doctors in ancient times didn't have a lot of experience or medical books to go by, so medicine was essentially a lot of trial and error. And this practice was one heck of a trial and a huge error. Now, the rationale behind this treatment was that consuming poison in small amounts would cure people's sickness. Since toads were very poisonous animals, the doctors decided they would be the scapegoats. Well, it turns out making a toad vomit isn't as simple as saying boo. To extract the poison, they had to get the toads to vomit, and getting those slippery amphibians to puke was no easy task. So the doctors had to hang them upside down and then force feed them to induce vomiting. They were so convinced that this treatment was the ultimate cure that it was even used to treat people during the Black Plague. Well, that wasn't very smart because feeding poison to people who already had a very weakened immune system led to more infections and poisoning. So the death tolls just kept increasing, and this strange practice has proven to be ineffective. Bat blood remedy. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and what's more desperate than drinking the blood of a bat as a last resort to get better? Let's say you consider the idea that you could gain a superhero's powers just by drinking their favorite smoothie. That's pretty much what was going on with the bat blood remedy. The people drinking the bat's blood believed that bats were powerful creatures because they could fly and navigate at night with ease, so it was concluded that by consuming the animal's blood, they would ingest the powerful essence that gave the bat its special abilities like night vision and being able to hang upside down. So it was common for people back then to use bat blood as a treatment for any sort of blindness and to improve their eyesight. The blood was also a hot commodity because they believed that bats carried many viruses and made them resistant to viral illnesses like hepatitis, rabies, and malaria. Mummy powder. If you suffered any ailment in ancient Egypt, the chances of you drinking crushed up dead bones were very high. This is because the people in ancient Egypt simply believed that dead bones had magical powers and that drinking them could cure anything. It is practically like the one and all drug slots for sickness. So if you have a headache, toothache, or even an epileptic seizure, the doctors would exhume the bones of a dead mummy, grind it into fine dust, mix the whole thing with water, and feed it to you. Interestingly, they also believed that certain body parts cured specific symptoms. So let's say you have a migraine. You wouldn't be given a crushed leg, but the crushed skull of a mummified pharaoh. Soon enough, the healing powers of dead bones spread far and wide and became a very lucrative business for anybody willing to dig up dead people's graves and get the bones. Still, eventually, the practice died out as many people began to realize that they were practicing cannibalism. Electric fish therapy. Medieval doctors tried to relieve people's pains by administering bolts of shock from an electric fish, and this bizarre medical treatment started after some people reported feeling relief after getting accidentally shocked by the fish while swimming. Hey, I feel better! Rather than, I might need a new swimming spot. Talk about getting a charge out of healthcare. So they bought into the story and started capturing electric fish for treatment. So if you complained about knee pain or headache, they'd just fish one out of the aquarium and shock you back to health. The electric shock treatment was used to treat gout, limb paralysis, and a whole host of disorders, believing that the shock from the fish would course through a person's nerves and muscles and jolt them back to health. Yeah, that didn't work. Rather than jolting dead muscle back to life, the jolt caused multiple shocks that led to heart and respiratory failure, a typical case of moving from the frying pan to the fire. We are sure you didn't know that joining our Discord would be another excellent alternative treatment for your health and mood. Well, now you know, so join our Discord to get all the effective treatment you'll need. Pliny the Elder remedies. This whole practice started a long time ago when a certain Roman naturalist and philosopher appropriately named Pliny the Elder compiled all his life's work in a book called Naturalis Historia. The book contained thousands of plant, animal, and mineral cures and remedies for treating various illnesses. A few examples of these remedies are hyena soup for fertility. For couples who are unable to give birth, Pliny books recommend making stew with the genitals of a hyena and then eating the soup. This remedy is based on Pliny's belief that hyenas could become pregnant through their mouth. Powder from ancient spider's web was described as a treatment for contagious fever. You were expected to find the web of an ancient spider, burn it, and lick the powdery ash. As odd as these few examples of Pliny the Elder's remedies may seem to you now, back then, people trusted these kinds of natural, homemade concoctions to help their ailments. However, in reality, it often made their problem even worse or even killing them. Mustard gas treatment. Doctors in the olden days were so convinced that administering small amounts of poison to people who were already sick was the best approach to getting them to feel better. Now, this idea led them to expose people to mustard gas, a very poisonous chemical that was initially made to be used as a weapon. This gas was so toxic that it caused terrible burns and made breathing very hard. But of course, ancient doctors ignored all the red flags and started using the gas as a treatment for people who had tumors. Patients with cancer were asked to inhale small amounts of this gas with the hopes that they would target the tumors and burn them off. It was not a very smart idea because the gas burnt everything it came in contact with, including all the healthy cells, which made them sicker. Aside from that, the poor patients would get chemical burns all over their bodies, and it was a harrowing experience. After trying this awful idea for a while, the doctors finally realized mustard gas was just way too toxic and dangerous to ever use as a treatment because no matter how small the dose was, it still caused a lot of harm. Chicken poop for hair growth. It's 16th century London, and you are among the few lucky people who just survived syphilis, but as a side effect, you notice that your hair is constantly falling out and starting to go bald. So you quickly head to your local health shop hoping to find some effective treatment for hair loss, but instead of grabbing a bottle of something promising, you're handed a fresh pile of chicken droppings mixed with salt. The belief here was that the chicken poop would act as fertilizer to grow and strengthen the hair follicles since they were so helpful to plants. It was basically like smearing your head with a fresh dose of fertilizer each morning straight from your farmland. The gross, smelly mixture would then be rubbed all over their bald heads as hair cream. Well, the only thing achieved was making them smelly bald people. When they came to their senses and started to realize that poop was not the remedy for hair growth, the absurd smelly practice began to fade away and the plants got back their much-needed fertilizers. Crocodile dung contraceptive. It's ancient Egypt and you're one of the hottest guys in town living your best life and partying away your youth in Club Pyramid. No baby mama drama and no kids to hold you down. After another long night out partying and drinking at Club Pyramid, you convinced two of the sexiest girls to come home with you. At home, all three of you keep flirting with each other and decide to make love. However, one of the girls asks whether you have condoms since practicing safe sex is very important. But you assure them that you have something even better than a condom. After about 30 business seconds of intense lovemaking, you whip out your very own tested and trusted after-sex pill, crocodile dung. Trust me, it's the best, you proclaim as you hand over the not-so-glamorous after-party favor. So basically, the woman would just stuff the crocodile poop up their honeypot after sex to stop the released sperm from getting to any unfertilized eggs. This disgusting recipe actually worked for them because the poop of the crocodile would produce pathogens and bacteria that would basically terminate any sperm that it came in contact with. However, let's just say the side effects were not exactly the user reviews you'd want to read. Aside from the obvious disgusting experience, the pathogens from the poop also gave them serious infections that would cause a thick white discharge that looked like cottage cheese to come out of their honeypot. It would itch, burn, and swell and had a very unpleasant odor. This infection would make peeing or even making love a very painful experience for them. Well, the practice died out as quickly as it came about because the women soon realized that they were basically shooting themselves in the knee by making love and stuffing themselves with poop afterward, since most of the women who did this ended up dead. Mouse brain toothpaste. The Romans were determined to get that fresh breath and clean teeth by any means necessary, and they were willing to do anything even if it meant crushing up the brain of dead rats and rubbing it all over their teeth. For their dental teeth cleanser, the Romans would catch rats, kill them, extract the brain matter, and then mix it with charcoal and burnt substances including animal bones and oyster shells to create toothpaste for their teeth. Now, if you think they ended their scientific career on making toothpaste here, then you'd be very wrong. As a cherry on top, they needed one final ingredient to bring the whole thing together, so urine was introduced. They would actually zip down and pee into their crushed up mouse brain mix and make the toothpaste more watery. The idea was that the mouse brain would provide fresh, minty breath because obviously the mouse brain screams freshness, while the urine would serve as a powerful cleaning agent because it contained ammonia. Well, as crazy as the recipe of using urine and brains for dental hygiene, there's actually evidence that the Romans had one of the best smiles in ancient times. Wigs. Believe it or not, wigs were the bread and butter of fashion for men and women in the ancient era. They wore it every single second of every day. From the moment they woke up from sleep to the time they had to go to bed, some people would even sleep with theirs, and the reason for this was that a lot of them suffered from baldness and extreme hair loss as a result of syphilis and other diseases. However, these wigs were never washed. This led them to not only sport their latest in hair fashion, but also to host a bustling ecosystem of lice, fleas, and the occasional beetle family reunion. When the wig's smell became unbearable and hard to ignore, they would quickly take it out and spray perfume on it to mask the disgusting odor, making the whole stench worse. So you had two options: either endure the stench of the greasy, unwashed wigs, or endure the awful after effects of the perfume-coated dirty wigs. Pig toilet. If you hear the term pig toilet for the first time, chances are you'll probably think they're just regular toilets for pigs to do their number two. However, the reality of what a pig toilet represents is all shades of nasty. First of all, they were not made for pigs to poop, but for humans to poop, and then the pigs would feed on the feces. Ancient Chinese men wanted to figure out how to manage and recycle human waste, so they created the pig toilet. It was basically a combination of a human toilet and a pigsty. Talk about fast food for swine. The basic design model involved mounting a wooden toilet pigsty. The men then connected a pipe or chute from the toilet directly into the sty, so if you went inside to poop, your waste would literally just slide down the tube and fall into the pig's eating plate. The poop was basically breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the poor, unsuspecting pigs. And if that's not enough to turn your stomach, the poop from the pigs was also harvested and used as fertilizers for their crops because the digestive systems of the pigs allowed them to break down the poop from humans even better. It was essentially just one disgusting cycle of recycling poop. Well, this method of recycling waste came to a stop as fast as the stupid idea started because it was a very messy situation. Not only did it make the whole place stink like shit all the time, it was also spreading parasitic infections to everybody. Because essentially the pigs were eating every single deadly parasite in the feces, then depositing them back to the plants the humans would then use to cook. Literally, what goes around keeps coming back around, but with more infections and diseases. Want to find out more about all the disgusting things ancient men did? Then join our Discord channel to find out. Selling bodily fluids. So in ancient Greece, athletics were such a big deal, and the commoners literally saw them like demigods. Like every single athlete that participated in the sports was the equivalent of a prime 90s Michael Jordan, but better. Just before the start of any competition, they would completely get naked and cover every corner of their bodies with olive oil. The idea was that by becoming naked and slippery, they could easily avoid their opponent's hands or weapons, which makes sense. Well, only if you'd be able to ignore naked 6-foot adult males running around a field with their butts out. So after fighting and stabbing each other butt naked, you'd expect these guys to hop in the shower and get all the oil, sweat, filth, and dried blood off of them, right? Wrong. Instead of just bathing like normal human beings, they would sit and start to scrape the sweat and dirt mixtures of their bodies so that they could sell it to their adoring fans. Now, a group of slave boys would run around collecting all the scrapings and bottling them up. So instead of getting your shirt signed, you'd be going home with a fresh bottle of bodily fluid. Some people were actually convinced that the disgusting elixir had healing powers, and they would even go so far as rubbing the mixture on their aching joints and injuries, claiming it eased their pain. That was probably a huge lie, but at least they got to smell like the musky essence of a Greek god for a day. Public baths. Public baths were basically huge public bathrooms that looked a lot like the modern-day swimming pools. In ancient Rome, the citizens would gather there every day to bathe, socialize, and peek at people's naked bodies for free. So you can only imagine what would happen if 1,000 men came to wash in the same water every day for the next 3 weeks. Well, not so much when you realize that they probably left with more buddies than they came in with, like the microscopic germ kind. The worst part of this practice was that there were no disinfectants to kill germs, so the public baths were basically hotspots for every latest infection in town. To top it off, the water was only changed once every few months, depending on water availability. So they were technically cleaning their dirty bodies with even dirtier water. People in ancient times don't seem to have a high IQ. I guess we really did evolve from monkeys. Urine mouthwash. You finally got the courage to ask your crush out and invite her over for some Netflix and chill. On the D-Day, you get the lights, movie, and popcorn ready, but just before she comes, you sneak in a last-minute mouthwash rinse to ensure your breath is crisp. After all, you might just steal a kiss during that suspenseful scene. But if you lived in ancient Rome, you'd have to wait for other men to pee so you could use their golden elixir to rinse your mouth. It all began when a not-so-bright Roman citizen convinced the people that pee contained ammonia, which was supposedly great for its whitening properties and could also banish bad breath and kill germs. Plus, urine was free and readily available straight from the tap. You'd think that someone would at least question the irony behind this absurd practice, but it even became a lot more popular. The Chinese and Greeks were amazed by how smart rinsing out one's mouth with pee was, so they quickly started doing it too. So if you're ever out there and there's no available toothbrush or mouthwash to do the job, all you need to do is find the nearest toilet, zip down, pee, and just use your urine as your natural mouthwash. Ratmongers. In ancient Europe, there were men known as rat catchers. Their job was to catch rats and supply them to medical doctors who would use the animals to suck out infections from wounds or sores, literally. It's like having a tiny furry doctor, except no one asked for their help. Now, once a patient had an open wound sore or pus-filled injury, live rats would be held by their tails and dangled directly over the wound, and the rats were expected to suck on the affected area and start licking out the oozing infection. They believed that the dirty sewer rats were immune to the poisons causing human diseases, so the rats were essentially removing the infection from the wound by sucking it out. This disgusting practice was used for centuries, and needless to say, it did far more harm than good for poor patients, caused most of them to end up with life-threatening infections like leprosy and rat bite fever. So it was either you took your chances with your pre-existing infection or let a dirty rat suck on it and give you more diseases. The blood moss. It was supposed to be another bright and beautiful Sunday morning, but you find that your journey into womanhood had just begun, and it came with a bit of a messy surprise. You notice the sizable pool of blood staining your bedsheets and dripping down your legs. So there you are, panicking, calling for your mom at the top of your lungs, only to have her enter, calm as ever, and say you are simply going through what every woman goes through every month. But instead of reaching for a box of the modern feminine care aisle, she heads straight for the garden and plucks this weird-looking plant that she aptly rolls up and ties to stick up your vagina to stop the blood from flowing out. Now, while this practice was absolutely barbaric and very unsafe, unfortunately, it was the reality for many medieval European women because things like sanitary pads and tampons were not available at that time. They had to improvise, and the plant was quickly named blood moss. All All you had to do every month was pluck as many blood mosses as you could, roll them up into shape, and stuff them as deep as you could into your, well, you know what. Although the blood moss was very effective with retaining moisture, the practice of stuffing it up your vagina fell apart because it was very, very uncomfortable. Finding a better alternative was necessary, and soon the women decided that padding their underwear with cotton clothes was a lot more comfortable. Tasting body humors. You have been feeling sick for a while, so you finally bite the bullet and head to your doctor. When you get there, he asks you a few questions and then out of nowhere gives you a wet willy. And before you even have a chance to understand what's going on, he sticks the finger in his mouth and eats your earwax. As gross as this sounds, it was a pretty common practice in ancient Greece, and it all goes back to a certain doctor named Hippocrates. And yes, he was behind the Hippocratic Oath that all modern doctors still take. Hippocrates believed that the human body was like a big sack of flesh holding different bodily fluids called humors, and these humors were blood, yellow bile, black bile, and film, which was basically your snot, vomit, urine, blood, poop, and even your earwax. According to him, each humor represented an emotional state, so for a person to be healthy, all the humors had to be in a perfect balance. So, as part of their medical training, all the doctors would be presented with every single bodily fluid, from vomit to earwax, and they were required to taste all of it. The purpose of this quite disgusting act was so they could tell the difference between a healthy person's urine and a sick person's urine. As long as it was coming out of your body, Hippocrates and his interns were going to taste it. So, to truly know if you were healthy and properly balanced, all the doctors had to do was go down to Flavor Town. Dung plastering. Ancient Egyptians had a very unique process of burying their dead. It was basically a process called mummification, which was essentially using sawdust, herbs, and moss to keep the dead internal organs from decaying. This was because they believed that preserving parts of the dead body would make one's journey to the afterlife very smooth. Now, this is where it gets interesting. When a pharaoh dies, they would remove all his internal organs and dry the empty body out to remove all the moisture. The problem here was this process left the body looking hollow and sunken because all the moisture has dried out. So they stuffed the body with sawdust and moss, but it did not fill up the hollow parts or give the lifelike look that they were aiming for, so the Egyptians had to think of another substance that would act as the filling. So they introduced cow and goat poop to the mixture because they were very sticky and could be molded into different shapes. They used it to create a paste that would fill up all the hollow areas left in the dead body, and it was also a binding agent to seal up the dead body before it was wrapped in linen cloths. Basically, the dung was like the glue that held the whole body together and gave the mummy a more lifelike look overall.